Order. Questions to the Prime Minister, Mr. Martin Horwood.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in condemning the barbaric attack this morning on an office of a magazine in Paris in which it's reported that 10 or more people may have been killed. While details are still unclear, I know that this House and this country stands united with the French people in our opposition to all forms of terrorism, and we stand squarely for free speech and democracy. And these people will never be able to take us off those values. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Martin Horwood.
Well, the problems at Gloucestershire hospitals last week firsthand after an elderly relative phoned 111 and we ended up waiting for more than 4 hours for her to see a doctor in Cheltenham A&E, and then she was promptly discharged. The local trust seemed to be blaming patients making bad choices, but will the Prime Minister find out why so many 111 calls end in A&E, why trusts like ours route so many unplanned admissions through A&E, and why they can't provide emergency doctors at night in Cheltenham, all of which seem calculated to make normal winter pressures worse?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes an important point. I mean, in the last quarter, the NHS has faced some unprecedented challenges. There's been over 5.5 million people going to accident and emergency units. That's an increase of £250,000 on the previous year. Now, Gloucestershire has had £3.6 million under the £700 million of winter pressure money that we produced, and they should use that money to make sure they provide the best possible service they can. On the NHS 111 service, I think it is important to see what is actually happening with this service. The number of people using it has almost doubled over the last year. Of those who use it, 27% say that had it not been there, they would have gone to accident and emergency. But in the event of using 111, only 7% are going. So I think it is a good service, but I'm sure it can be further improved. But recognising the pressure on the NHS, I'm sure everyone in this House will want to say a thank you to our hard-working doctors and nurses and other hospital staff for all the work they do this winter.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in expressing horror and outrage about the unfolding events in Paris. We stand in solidarity with the people of France against this evil terrorist attack by people intent on attacking our democratic way of life and freedom of speech. We are united in our determination to defeat them. Mr. Speaker, doctors, nurses and other NHS staff are doing a valiant job, but over 90,000 people in the last quarter waited on trolleys for more than 4 hours. At least 10 hospitals have in recent days declared major incident status, and one had to resort to Twitter to appeal for medical staff. Does he agree with me that our NHS is facing a crisis?
Well, our NHS is facing huge pressure this winter, particularly on its A&E units. But I think the point it is important to make is this. The NHS is facing this winter with more doctors, more nurses and more money than it's ever had in its history. I think what is important is that we recognise the pressures that are there and we put in place plans for the short term, the medium term and the long term, but recognising with the massive increase in the number of people going to A&E, any health system in the world would struggle to cope with some of this pressure.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, in June 2011, this was the Prime Minister's solemn promise, and I quote, "I refuse to go back to the days when people had to wait for hours on end to be seen in A&E. So let me be absolutely clear, we won't." Will he now apologise to patients across the country for having broken that promise?
I deeply regret any patient who doesn't get a good service, but let us be absolutely clear about the numbers in terms of people accessing A&E. Today, compared with 4 years ago, over 2,500 more patients are seen within 4 hours than 4 years ago. That is what's happening. Now, we knew there was pressure on our NHS, and that is why, over the last year, we've seen 1,800 more doctors in our hospitals, 4,700 more nurses in our hospitals, and 2,500 more beds in our hospitals. Now, there's more that we need to do, but let us recognise that the health service in every part of our United Kingdom faces these challenges. We must go on giving them the money, the resources and the people so they go on providing a great service.
Ed Miliband.
As far as I can see, he's not apologising to patients, he's blaming the patients. And the pressures on A&E are not just happening on his watch, but are a direct result of the decisions he's taken. When he decided to close almost a quarter of walk-in centres, wasn't it blindingly obvious that if people couldn't go to a walk-in centre, it would have a big impact on A&E?
We've got 1,000 more doctors in A&E, and we're spending £13 billion more on the NHS, when 4 years ago his health secretary said it would be irresponsible to spend more money. But what is interesting, Mr. Speaker, here we are, question 3 on the NHS, and he's got no solutions to put forward. And that only says to me, while we are interested in improving the NHS, he simply wants to use it as a political football.
Mr. Speaker, this is about politics. It's his politics, and they have failed. No answer on walk-in centres. Let's try him on another decision he's made that's been a cause of the crisis. When he decided to reduce the availability of social care services so that 300,000 fewer older people are getting the help they need, wasn't it blindingly obvious that if people couldn't get the care they needed at home, it would have a big impact on A&E?
Again, absolutely no solutions, and presumably, if he had any solutions, he would have implemented them in Wales. Now, he raises the importance of social care, and I agree. And that is why, from the 1st of April, we are putting £5 billion more into social care via the Better Care Fund. Up until now, the Labour Party has told us not to introduce the Better Care Fund. I assume from that they now support this important investment.
Ed Miliband.
There's one very simple solution: get rid of this useless Prime Minister. No answer on care. No answer on care for the elderly. No answer on care for the elderly. When he decided, next thing that he did, when he decided to ignore the pleas of doctors, nurses and patients and plough ahead with his damaging top-down reorganisation, wasn't it blindingly obvious that if you divert £3 billion out of patient care, it would have a big impact on A&E?
Our changes have cut bureaucracy and saved £4.9 billion. That is why there are 9,000 more doctors, there are 3,000 more nurses, there are 6 million more people getting inpatient appointments. But you can see it as plain.
There's too much noise in the chamber on both sides. The Prime Minister's answers must be heard. The Prime Minister.
But you can see this as plain as you like. The Leader of the Opposition apparently said to the political editor of the BBC, "I want to weaponise the NHS." That's what he said. Now, I think that is disgraceful. The NHS is not a weapon. It's a way we care for our families. It's a way we care for the elderly. It's a way we look after the frail. So perhaps when he gets to his feet, he will deny that he said he wanted to weaponise the NHS, a disgusting thing to say.
I'll tell him what's disgusting.
Order. I said a moment ago the Prime Minister's answers must be heard. The Leader of the Opposition's questions must be heard as well. It's very simple. Ed Miliband.
I'll tell him what's disgusting. It's a Prime Minister who said people could put their trust in him on the NHS, and he has betrayed that trust. Mr. Speaker, he's in denial about the crisis in the NHS. This is a crisis on his watch as a result of his decisions. That's why people know if they want to get rid of the crisis in the NHS, they have to get rid of this Prime Minister.
If ever you wanted proof that they want to use this issue as a political football, you've just seen it. And if Labour has an answer to the NHS. Can they explain why they cut the budget in Wales by 8%? That is where Labour is in charge. All parts of the United Kingdom face a health challenge, but the real risk to the NHS is the risk of unfunded spending commitments, bringing chaos to our economy, which would wreck our NHS. That is the risk, and that is why the choice at the election will be stick with the people with a long-term plan, not a Labour Party that would wreck our economy and wreck our NHS.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with my constituent who contacted me at the weekend, asking to join us, and also saying that the only people fit to run our economy are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor? The surprise was that the gentleman was the ex-chairman of Ilford North Labour Party.
I'm glad. I'm sure that's the first of 4 million conversations he'll be having at the coming election. It sounds like his one's going quite well. But there is an important point here. There is no strong NHS without a strong economy. And with our economy, you can see the deficit cut in half, 1.75 million more people in work, the fastest growth of any major economy in the West. That is the record, and that is what will enable us to fund our NHS, to fund our schools, and to provide the public services our country needs.
Mr. Jamie Reid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With patients being told to pretend that they're camping, the symbol of the Prime Minister's NHS is of patients being treated in tents outside of accident and emergency. When he promised a bare-knuckle fight against accident and emergency service closures, did he intend to mislead the electorate?
Look, as I've said, all our health services right across the United Kingdom face a challenge. Actually, the English NHS that I am responsible for is performing better than the Welsh NHS, the Scottish NHS, or the NHS in Northern Ireland. But the facts are these. Compared with 4 years ago, there are 2,500 more people every day seeing a doctor or a nurse within 4 hours. Why is that happening? Because we put the money in. And when we put the money in, the Shadow Health Secretary said it was irresponsible. Presumably that's why Labour cut the NHS in Wales.
Sir David Amis.
I thank the House for that reception that more than compensates for my neither having been a Duke or an Earl. Later today, the second edition of the booklet, A Party of Opportunity, will be launched. Will my right honourable friend agree with what the former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has written in the booklet? National wealth eases poverty, pays for social care, creates jobs, and that is exactly what this Conservative-led government has been doing.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, is that the first duty of a government is to produce a stable, strong and growing economy that can fund the defence we need, the public services that we need, and on this side of the House we understand that. On that side of the House they've learned absolutely nothing over the last 4 years, and they would borrow and spend and tax and put us back exactly in the position of crisis and chaos that we found the country in 2010.
Mr. John Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, the one thing that was clear about the referendum in Scotland was the amount of young people that were getting involved, not just in making a vote, but actually going out there campaigning and being part of it. Is it not time that we got the rest of the country on board here and got votes for 16 and 17-year-olds?
I thought the referendum campaign in Scotland did switch a whole lot of people onto politics and political issues because the question that was being asked was so important. Now, we've said that we should respect the views of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, and we will devolve those powers over voting age. In this House, I'm very happy for us to have a vote. Personally, I think the right age is 18, but I'm very happy to listen to the debate, to listen to the arguments, and to put them forward.
Mr. Michael Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over 50 years, the Thalidomiders have been campaigning for justice, particularly from the German manufacturers Grunenthal. Now that over 150 MPs have signed an open letter to the German Chancellor, would the Prime Minister add this to his busy agenda today so that we might get a decent and fair settlement for all concerned?
Well, I have, on behalf of a constituent, actually raised this issue not only through the European Parliament but also with German authorities, and I'll certainly reflect on what the honourable gentleman says.
Mr. Speaker, the price of oil has now fallen to $50 a barrel. While this is good news for motorists, it's bad news for Scotland's oil industry and thousands of workers. It comes just weeks after Nicola Sturgeon said we were on the verge of a second oil boom, and after the Independence White Paper said it would be $113 a barrel. But this is a serious issue. Jobs depend on it. So will the Prime Minister agree to meet with a member from East Renfrewshire, a cross-party delegation with industry leaders and workers to see what support can be provided?
Well, I absolutely agree with him on all three grounds. I mean, first of all, North Sea oil is a vital industry for the United Kingdom. It's one of the biggest investors in our country, and we should do everything we can to help it, which is why, second, in the autumn statement, we actually took some steps to improve the taxation regime for North Sea oil. But third, I think it does make the case for the United Kingdom, as we said during that referendum campaign, that North Sea oil is better off with the broad shoulders of the United Kingdom being able to stand behind it, because you never know whether the oil price is going to be over $100 or, as it is today, around $50. And I think it makes the case for the strength of the United Kingdom and the utter misguided nature of the SNP, who thought they could base their entire budget on such a high oil price.
Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, latest ONS figures show that youth unemployment in Crawley is at the lowest level since records began. But of course, there is a lot more that we need to do. Can my right honourable friend say what further policies the government are pursuing to ensure that business in Crawley and across the country generates even more employment as part of our long-term economic plan?
I'm delighted to agree with my honourable friend that when you look at the figures in Crawley, the youth claimant count has fallen by 42% in the last year alone, and the long-term youth claimant count, long-term young unemployed people, down by 71%. He asked what more we can do. Well, we're cutting the jobs tax of small businesses and charities by £2,000. We're abolishing national insurance contributions for those who employ the under-21s. We're extending the doubling of small business rate relief, and of course we've cut corporation tax, including for small firms. Start-up loans are being offered right around the country, including to those in Crawley who are taking this up, and I think this government has a real claim to say it's the most friendly to start-ups and entrepreneurs and small businesses that we've ever had in our country.
Mr. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the Christmas period, NHS staff have worked tirelessly to see the patients they can. But increased waiting time at GP surgeries have meant more and more people forced to use A&E. Why doesn't the Prime Minister accept the Labour's plan to employ 8,000 additional GPs is desperately needed and would make a real difference to the lives of my constituents?
Well, from the last 24 hours, what I can read, Labour's plan is to tax people in London and to spend all the money in Scotland, is what I've... and I look forward to how he's going to explain that to his constituents in Ealing. But there's a serious point. There's a serious point to the honourable gentleman, which is obviously the health service has changed in Ealing, and obviously we've now got in Hammersmith and Central Middlesex, they've both got GP-led urgent care centres that are open 24 hours a day. So far they're seeing over 400 patients a day, and 99% of those patients are seen within 4 hours, and obviously you've got the expansion of the A&E unit at Northwick Park Hospital. But I think this goes to the point that we need to make sure that the 111 service is really helping to spread the information to people who need care about where they can best get it.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has repeatedly highlighted the importance of northern Lincolnshire and the wider Humber area to the offshore renewables sector. Would my right honourable friend agree that the recent announcement of the establishment of a National College for Wind Energy, a UTC in Scunthorpe, and further expansion of local existing training facilities cement the opportunities for local people to benefit from the industry, boost the local economy, and highlight the importance of northern Lincolnshire to the northern powerhouse?
No, well, my honourable friend is a real champion for North Lincolnshire and for Humberside in general, and we are determined that this recovery is going to be different from previous recoveries, and we're going to see growth in jobs and investment right across our country. That's why he and others with me have been working hard to bring investment to the Humber, including, of course, the vital Siemens plant. That's why we've seen employment go up, we've seen unemployment come down, and because of the local growth deals agreed in July, the Humber Local Enterprise Partnership has got over £100 million for local projects, which should create up to 9,000 jobs and allow more than 5,000 homes to be built. So we're determined to see recovery embed right across the country.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud of the NHS in the North East, but not one hospital trust is meeting the government's own scaled-back targets for treatment in A&E, not one. But the Prime Minister prefers to focus on a top-down reorganisation of the NHS, breaking it up for the benefit of his buddies, putting competition before care and profit before people. Does he really imagine we will trust him with our NHS?
Well, let me tell the Honourable Lady what is actually happening in the NHS in Newcastle. Since 2010, there are 191 more doctors, there are 698 more nurses. Last week, over 3,000 patients went to A&E, and all but 190 were seen within 4 hours. And I have to say to her, if getting rid of the bureaucracy in the NHS, which we did in England, was such a bad idea, why is it the NHS in England is performing better than other parts of the country that didn't take those steps?
David Rutley.
The recent final report of the Alderley Park Task Force highlights how around 300 jobs have been brought to the site in the last 18 months, with a healthy pipeline of new businesses looking to locate there. Does my right honourable friend agree that this helps highlight why the government is right to put extra growth deal funding to help further strengthen the life science sector in the North West, which is absolutely vital?
Well, my honourable friend has been a real champion for life sciences in general and also for life sciences investment in the northwest of England, which is an absolutely crucial part of the improvement and expansion of that part of our country's economy. And obviously that includes Alderley Park. What we've seen is the local growth deal announced last July, which is going to establish a £40 million joint life sciences fund across Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Warrington, which will support the sector right across the northwest. That will include Alderley Park. This is the first government to have a proper life sciences strategy, because this is a vital industry for our country's future.
Elfyn Llwyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those of us who opposed the Iraq War for very good reason, and many other people outside this place, are very concerned about the inordinate delay in publishing the findings of the Chilcot report. Can I ask the Prime Minister, please, where did this bizarre notion come from that if it's not published before the end of February, we can't see it until after the election? What about the month of March?
Well, in many ways, I share the right honourable gentleman's frustration in that, I would love this report to have come out already. And indeed, he and I voted together against the last Labour government over and over again, saying, please, can you get on and set up the independent inquiry that's needed? And if they'd got on and set up the independent inquiry, it would have been published, debated and dealt with by now. So I find it immensely frustrating, but it is not a matter for me. I am not able to order the publication of this report. It is independent. It is up to Sir John Chilcot about when he publishes his report. He will make the decision, not me.
Mr. Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, youth unemployment in Skipton is down by over 70% since 2010. City growth deal funding for the Skipton flood alleviation scheme will unlock a further 500 jobs. Is there anything the Prime Minister can do to make that happen?
Well, I will look very carefully at this, because, as he says, not only has the claimant count fallen, but the long-term youth claimant count has fallen by 50% in his constituency in the last year alone. Now, I know how much his constituents want to see work on the Skipton Flood Defence Project, and that's a very high priority for York, North Yorkshire and the East Riding Local Enterprise proposal. We'll be making an announcement about this in the coming weeks.
Lisa Nandy.
Wigan recently, my local nurses granted a dying grandma's fairly remarkable last wish when they wheeled her hospital bed into the car park so she could be reunited for one last time with her much-loved horse, just hours before she died from cancer. Those brilliant nurses sum up everything that's great about our National Health Services. But in a recent poll, only 4% of them said they thought the Prime Minister was doing a good job. Can you tell us why?
Well, I'm full of praise for nurses in Wigan. I think they work extremely hard to provide a good service. I particularly applaud the nurse in Wigan who chased the Health Secretary down the corridor and told him a thing or two about how to run the health service. But what I would say is, if you judge us on our record, there are 9,000 more doctors, there are 3,300 more nurses in our NHS, because we made the decision to protect the funding of the NHS, which Labour told us was irresponsible.
Mr. Andrew Turner.
Would my right honourable friends join me in supporting the Perpetuous Tidal Energy Centre? It's a public-private partnership which will, from the Isle of Wight, give the world's first grid-connected tidal array test facility. This will put the UK at the forefront of tidal energy technology, protect existing jobs and create several hundred new ones.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a very good point, because the UK is now the most attractive market in the world for investment in offshore wind, in marine renewables, and we want to maintain that world-leading position. We want to harness the economic benefits and the environmental benefits that that brings, and we want to see local centres of expertise. And from what I can see, the Perpetuous Tidal Energy Centre sounds like exactly the sort of exciting initiative we should be supporting.
Lady Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly half of all London ambulances which are called out to critical cases do not arrive within their target 8-minute response time. Is this what the Prime Minister had in mind when he told us that the NHS would be safe in his hands?
Well, the NHS wouldn't have been safe if we'd followed Labour's proposal of cutting the NHS. We rejected that advice and put more money into the NHS, and specifically with the London Ambulance Service, it has launched a national and international recruitment campaign. It's already hired 400 new members of staff. We're providing 15 million extra money for the NHS Ambulance Service in London, and that's why in 2013-14 it's met its target, attending over 460,000 patients with life-threatening illnesses. That's what's happening in our NHS, because we made the decisions to reform the NHS and cut the bureaucracy and put the money in. Both decisions opposed by the Labour Party.
Peter Tapsell.
Reverting to the subject of the Chilcot report, about which I have questioned the Prime Minister in the past, did he note that our distinguished colleague Lord Hurd in the House of Lords yesterday said it was an absolute disgrace that it has not been published, a view which I certainly hold. And since it is absolutely well known by the cognoscenti that the report was completed many months ago, who is it, if the Prime Minister is helpless on this subject, who is blocking it? Is it the Secretary of the Cabinet? Is it Sir John Chilcot? Or is it the White House?
To the Father of the House, I'd say, my understanding is this. The report is largely finished, but in every report like this, there is a process where you have to write to those people who are criticised in the report, and you have to give them an opportunity to respond. This is now the process for all of these reports, whatever government they are launched under. It's known as the salmondisation process, although quite why, I'm not sure. I don't think it's got anything to do with the former First Minister in Scotland. But nonetheless, this is not within my power to grant the publication of this report. It is independent. It is Sir John Chilcot. This process has to be finished, and then the report will be published.
Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask him once again, will he apologise to all those who have suffered and continue to suffer in aid departments across the country due to his mismanagement of the National Health Service?
I couldn't have been more clear. I regret every single person who goes to hospital who doesn't get the treatment they deserve. But our responsibility is to put in the money, which we're doing, to provide the extra staff, which is happening, to have a proper plan for joining up health and social care, which we're doing, and then to fund the Simon Stevens plan, which is the right long-term answer for our health service. But, Mr. Speaker, people around the country will have been able to see there is one part of this House of Commons working to improve our NHS for all its users. There is another part of the House of Commons that wants to weaponise the NHS in the most disgusting phrase I think I've heard in politics, and that wants to treat it like a political football, and I know they'll reach the right conclusion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Home care workers do a fantastic job caring for some of the most frail in our society, and yet over 200,000 of them are not even paid the national minimum wage. Will the Prime Minister talk to the Chancellor about getting HMRC to properly pursue and prosecute those cowboy care agencies who are exploiting these people?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There's far more that we can do to prosecute and chase down those organisations that don't pay their staff properly, and that is why we're bringing in together to the Home Office the organisations to help make this happen, whether it's the Gangmasters Licensing Authority or indeed the National Crime Agency. All the powers are there to go after those that don't pay the minimum wage when they should.
Alison McGovern.
On Monday, I listened to residents of Mendel Court, an extra care facility in my constituency in Bromborough, tell me about their serious worries about social care. For the good of all of those who need care and all NHS patients, won't the Prime Minister go further to integrate health and social care?
What we're doing with the Better Care Fund is producing a fund of £5 billion, which will be money that the health and local authorities can spend together. The Labour Party, up to now, has opposed that fund and said it shouldn't be brought into place. But I'm afraid it's worse than that, because the Secretary of State, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, has been wandering around the television studios today saying to anyone who's prepared to listen that he'd increase funding for social care. But there is only one slight problem with this, which is this is what the Shadow Chancellor has said. And he said this on the news just on the 5th of January. There will be no additional funding for local government, he said, unless we can find money from somewhere else. And we have not... we are. Because if they'd waited for the end of the quote, they would have heard this. And we've not been able to do that in the case of local government. So there we are. Total and utter chaos. One of them going round so there'll be extra money, another one saying there won't be any extra money, £20 billion of unfunded commitments. They would lead to total chaos in our economy and a total breakdown in our health service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the future arrangements for the upkeep of the Royal Air Force Memorial Chapel at Biggin Hill, the iconic former Battle of Britain airfield?
I can absolutely confirm to the House that this chapel will be preserved for future generations, as we've always recognised its importance and its rich heritage. I think in all the great moments of British history, it is possibly the case that the Battle of Britain 1940 stands out as one of the most important times there have been. So we will protect this chapel and do whatever it takes to protect it for future generations.
Last but not least, Sir Gerald Kaufman.
Will the Prime Minister take action immediately to clear up the shambles at the Home Office, which has resulted in a constituent of mine who applied for a fast-track passport before Christmas, was promised that it will be delivered to him by courier on New Year's Eve, still hasn't had it, and as a result has had to cancel a trip he was due to make yesterday, at great personal cost and at great damage to his personal life. Will he make sure that man is able to travel this week and clear up this mess?
I'm very happy to look at the individual case that the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about, but I think we've made huge strides forward to deal with potential backlogs in terms of passports, and I think the Home Secretary is doing a fantastic job.
Order.